It's Wednesday, March 15th, and we're going to see what's happening in the world, what's going on in the world affairs, and all of that. I was actually just in the middle of two meetings, so that's why we got started a little bit later than usual, and all in that kind of space. You know what happens? Sometimes you get busy because the world is apparently opening back up. So I just found out that there's going to be a multiple hundred member tour apparently of the Black Hebrewites and other folks that is going to be coming to Durham, and I'm going to be doing one of those historical tours. So I actually got to get with the network and figure out what we're going to do about the 30th, because that's what the morning that it's going to be at. But apparently it's an international group that is coming from all over, and apparently they're coming to talk about all the various world issues as they see fit, and all in that space. Sometimes y'all may run across that group at your local corner, because they oftentimes are the ones that are preaching and doing other things in those corners and all in that space. I know they're down in Florida. I know they're down in North Carolina. I know they're up in Lee Newton Roads area of New York, and I know that they're in a lot of other places as well, but I didn't know that they were part of a national conference until I just got a call, and they said that they needed me to do a tour, because that's part of what I do on occasion, is give some tours of the lovely historical African American community in Durham, the Black Wall Street area, and all of that. So that's what's going to be happening, and that's why we got started on a little bit later than usual. So that's what was going on in that space. I'm going to see what's going on in the world. I know a lot of folks are still paying attention to what's happening in Ukraine and definitely other parts of the world as well, because we had a very interesting conversation yesterday around Nigeria and what's going on in that part of the world. But I'm going to bring up Lee Newton Rhodes. We're going to see what other things are happening in the world. And of course, I'm going to check in with my good friend, Sasha Starr, to see what's happening in Ukraine. So right now, I'm going to bring in Lee Newton Rhodes and see what he's got going on in his world. So like I said, I was not expecting to have two calls, because definitely, as we know here on the network, there is a business event, a business kind of event that goes on regularly. It deals with the African American community. It started off being semi-annual, and now it's pretty much almost monthly. So the director of that, who is actually also involved on the board of Pod TV, he jumped on and wanted to know about creating links, because they're going to be doing that next week. But I've already told him he's in charge. You're talking about the inmates in charge. I put him in charge because Nick's out of town, so I know which ones I've got to be responsible for, which are the main things on the network and all in that space. So like I said, they'll have
Good morning, Mark.
They'll definitely have it on the special conference channel that we now have and all of that. So like I said, I just had to see what he was talking about and give him some pointers and tips and all along those lines. But how are you doing, Lee? We're going to see who else is
I'm
here.
doing good. I just want to back up a little bit
We're going to have a conversation with him and see what's going on in Ukraine. I'm definitely
for the benefit of myself and for our audience. Could you define or explain who or what the Black Hebrews are? Are they a Jewish group? Or are they a group that has to be Black? I mean, what exactly are they?
You know,
or what do they represent or observe?
As my understanding, and talking to the person that I was talking to, they're like a Christian group. They actually believe that they are part of the original Israel nation and part of the original Hebrewites that were there in Israel, but they are definitely of African American descent, and they definitely think that they have ties to actual Israel and all in that space. So that is part of what the Black Hebrews beliefs are, and I can actually tell a little bit more about them and everything in that space, but that is my understanding. Like I said, I would sometimes
I'm confused, because you said they're related to the original Israelites, right, but they associate themselves as a Christian organization.
That's what the person told me and everything, but I'm looking it up. Black Hebrew Israelites are a new religious movement claiming that African Americans are descendants of the ancient Israelites. Some subgroups believe that Native and Latin Americans are descendants of the Israelites as well. They can blend elements of their teaching from a wide degree of sources, and I do know that sometimes they can be very nationalistic and things in that space. But definitely, as folks that are in that space, and Israel definitely is part of the Christian narrative as also. But yeah, they definitely claim that they are part of the original Israel, and apparently some of them live in Domoni, Israel, with the first ones arriving in that country in 1969. So they have, even in some cases, adopted Hebrew names to replace the names, and we've heard the narrative slave names and everything that to replace the names they believe were derived from slavery. And many of them are vegans, and they have some other things that are going on as well. As a matter of fact, gospelcoalition.org says that they've got several things that you should know about them. And they are also called the African Hebrew Israelites, Black Jews, Black Hebrews, Black Israelites, or Hebrew Israelites. And it is an umbrella term for various religious sects and congregations that believe that people of color, usually African Americans, are descendants of a lost tribe of ancient Israelites. So that is kind of where they go and all in that.
So they go back very far then. If they did it start recently, like in the 20th century, or is this lineage still going all the way back to like Egypt? Because
the lineage they claim goes all the way back to Egypt and everything, but I mean, back to Israel and back to the Middle East and all in that space. That's where the lineage goes. But yes, the organization itself, from my understanding, it started in the 20th century, probably like in around, like I just said, they went down in, I want to say it was 60s to that part of Israel. So it is a fairly new group. My guess is that it probably came out of the Black Power movement of the 60s, and there were several other groups that came out of that space as well. So that is my guess as to when it actually started. But like I said, I do know that there are members up in New York. There are members in Florida. They had a very active community, I think, in Florida. And then I've seen them around North Carolina. And apparently they've got a national conference that'll be coming to Durham. But I'll learn more about them on the 30th.
I sure would like to learn more also. Because like in Ethiopia, a number of years ago, Israel, they airlifted a bunch of Ethiopians to Israel. And these people, they immigrated and absorbed them into Israel society, into Jewish society, because these were Jewish Ethiopians who were somehow disconnected from the country. But the part that's confusing me is the Christian part. Nothing wrong with Christians, but which are they?
The person told me, and as I'm reading it,
I used to think that it's mutually exclusive. You're either Christian or you're Jewish. How can you be both?
Right. And like I said, they described it that way, the person that was calling me about the bus tour, but I will learn more and see where they got that concept from and if that was a misconcept, because I've always heard that, because my dad has actually been in a long time relationship with a Jewish woman from originally from New York. I think Linda's originally from New York, and you are right, they are usually not the same. Dad is actually not one that is got deep religious beliefs. Not that he doesn't think that there is a higher power, but he's not big on organized religion. And definitely Linda, his lady love of probably longer than he was with my mom, has been definitely in that space of coming from the Jewish community, and particularly the Jewish community of New York. She was actually a well-known dance critic, and I think she even did some dancing herself as well. But they've been.
Mark, another question for you.
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned the term Black Power. Mm-hmm. That myself, I associate that somehow with a political movement, with sometimes with violence, what have you. Does that have anything to do with Black Hebrews?
I was just thinking they came around the same time and everything, but that's what I meant when I said around that time frame is the same time the day came, and it is also claiming the connection to the original Israel and saying that they were born of the original lost tribes and all that. Because I think that if I understand my religion correctly, there were like multiple tribes there, and one of them was lost. Even the Bible talks about that, and they are claiming that they are the descendants of that tribe and all in that space. But I'm sure that there were members of that, just like there were members of the Muslim community that were associated with Black Power as well. Even we have an exhibit currently at Hayti that deals with Floyd McKissick Sr. And Floyd McKissick Sr. was one of the founders of CORE, but he was also very much into Black Power. But what people also forget about Black Power and some of the elements of Black Power was it was about economic power. So he created a city. Unfortunately, the city did not thrive the way that it could have thrived, but it was a city called Soul City, and that was literally the name of it. And it lived as a township. It still exists, but it was supposed to be like kind of out of the enterprise zone, and it was supposed to be creating almost like another version of a Black Wall Street. So it's supposed to be a predominantly African American community. I mean, others were welcome to come as well, but it's supposed to be Black run. And Floyd McKissick Sr., Floyd McKissick Jr., we've actually had on the show before, and that was his dad, was actually one that was the creator of it, the senior was, and he was very much associated with Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon was very much into the enterprise zones and other ways to get the African American community economics into a stronger space, and some of those were creating economic zones in historically depleted areas, whether that be Harlem, whether that be Compton or a number of other places. So that's part of what he was doing. And like I said, unfortunately, they got city and well, city money. They definitely got or county money, and they definitely got federal and state money. But unfortunately, that never really took off. And like I said, at the time that my parents had their radio station, which was around the late 70s to the mid to late 80s and all of that, and that was in Warrenton. That was one town over, and all in that space. The health company, Healthco, which was a private clinic and everything. I think that may still be there, and one or two other businesses that were recruited might still be there as well. But it never really did take off in any form or fashion, unfortunately. But like I said, it was an effort to create a city in northern North Carolina that, like I said, it did not have success, unfortunately. And like I said, now it is part of the areas of rural North Carolina and rural United States that are suffering, and all along those lines. But I'm going to bring in Dan Worthington, and he might have some questions. And I'm also going to bring in Sasha Starr, because I was going to get to some news stories and all of that. But Sasha, what's going on in the whole world of Ukraine and Russia and all in that space? Because like I said, I do know that that is something that is happening in the world that everybody is paying attention to. And we definitely had the show yesterday, and I did listen to part of it. And I just wondering if there is any latest developments that we need to know about what's going on in Ukraine. I know several people have asked you, well, actually, I got two questions. Is this war ever going to end? And will it end anytime soon? Because we're already going well into the second year and all of that. And I actually had an interesting theory, and I don't know what your thoughts around this is, but if Russia breaks up, Russia loses the war, and then they break up, and I've heard you say that that might happen. We heard the Nigerians say that Nigeria could conceivably break up, and we know that there is a number of other places around the world that are the country as it is has broken up. Shucks, you're talking about, it's a long shot. Don't think it's going to happen. But there are some folks that may even think that the United States could break up at some point or another. Do we run the danger of having a series of, instead of 200 countries or 200 plus countries that we've got now, having like 400 countries and a bunch of fiefdoms and warlords all over the world?
Well, it's always a possibility. If you remember the former Yugoslavia, it was 6 or even 7 countries, and now they all fell apart, and each one is a separate country. And there were actually substantial reasons for that, because all these countries had also similar languages, but different religions. Some of them were Catholics, like Croatians. Some of them were Orthodox, like Serbians, and some of them were even Catholics and Protestant countries, and some were Muslim countries, like Bosnia, for example. So it was probably inevitable, and unfortunately, there were a lot of people killed in the process, as we know. And it seems to me that Russia, 30 years ago, when it fell apart in 1991, I think that process was superficially delayed, and it's now beginning to unravel. And really, the fallout of the separation of all these republics, it will be played in now. It's already started with Ukraine, and it will be played over several other former socialist Soviet republics, such as Georgia. Moldova has unrest. Kazakhstan is almost openly helps Russia to avoid Western sanctions and get all the letters. There was a very interesting article. They studied the purchases of Kazakhstan semiconductors. In 2021, they purchased something like miserable amount, like 12,000 worth of semiconductors. Now, however, in 2022, they purchased 12.5 million worth of semiconductors. So are there any new plants or factories or some other installation open in Kazakhstan that they all of a sudden in 2022 needed so much semiconductors? Not at all. They didn't open anything at all. All that was a black market for Russians to buy through Kazakhstan all these forbidden elements. Now, In Ukraine, there is still tremendous fighting goes on. In Bakhmut, it's really, a city itself is not important point at all, because even before the war, there were like 80,000 people, and now there are less than 10,000 still left. But it's a very good strategic point that it does not give, I don't know how to show the map, but I've seen it many times. It sits right, so there is a danger that all Bakhmut will be encircled by Russian army, and therefore all the defenders would probably lost. But it's not the case, because there's a supply to Bakhmut is still going strong, and nobody can do anything about that. And also, Bakhmut is an excellent point for a springboard for the imminent Ukrainian attack, which is coming most likely in April, maybe mid-April, the latest. So decision was made to keep on Bakhmut, not to give it up. There were a lot of talks about just leave it for now, going to retrench to the lines behind Bakhmut, but decision was made by president and all his generals to keep on fighting for Bakhmut. Now, speaking about the duration of war, see, the problem is that Putin has a very powerful friends, namely Donald Trump and this guy from Florida, who's what's his name, DeSantis. Okay, so with a friends like that, Putin has absolutely open. By the way, I want to tell you something, that in the today's Washington Post, it was said that China and Russia deploying space weapons to attack U.S. satellites, warns Space Force chief. You see, people like Trump and DeSantis, what they're saying is that Russia, we have no business in Russia. Whatever Russia wants to do, let them do. We don't care. Our enemy number one is China, and we have to concentrate on China. Valid. What's that?
Someone's got some visitors, Sasha.
Yeah,
You have visitors?
Not me.
No? Oh, okay.
No.
Well, in any case, so the situation is that neither China or Russia alone can pose any significant threat to United States. But two of them together, what they are now planning, they are shooting a lot of new satellites. For example, China's military has deployed 347 satellites, including 35 launched in the past 6 months, to target U.S. forces in a future conflict, the commander of Space Force told Senate hearing on Tuesday. Space Force General Jens Saltzman said Russia is also testing and deploying orbital anti-satellite weapons, extensive cyber capabilities, and land-based anti-satellite missiles, electronic jammers, and lasers. So they are, especially Emperor Xi, he's coming to Russia in next few days. So there is united front against United States, which is China and Russia. And in many cases, Russia, believe it or not, has much more weapons, especially ballistic missiles and so on, than China. And Russia is on the military terms, is much more dangerous to United States than China. So right now, thanks to Ukrainian forces, they basically disabled Russian forces. So right now, there is a point that with the necessary help, Ukraine can defeat Russian forces on its own territory. I'm not saying that Ukraine will cross the border and will go to Moscow or so on. I'm not suggesting that. But just to free their territory, including Crimea and so on, at spells defeat of Putin regime. Putin will fall.
Sasha?
And this is something what I think U.S. should try for. Yeah.
It's just a question. I heard something in the news about it, Russia shooting down an American drone. You want to expound on exactly what happened?
Yeah, I'm following that. It's again, it depends on further investigation and the U.S. Posture, whether they will take it as a small, meaningless accident or as an attack against U.S. Armed forces. It remains to be seen. I'm not sure at this point how it's be treated. But they deliberately destroyed the drone, and actually, U.S. had to actually take it down. So,
Hey,
no,
Lee and Sasha and Gan may want to jump on this as well, but there was a war that was called Shock and Awe that was 20 years ago, and there are still troops that are in that area that are U.S. troops and everything. So that was 20 years ago. Is there any danger? Because there are even some Iraqi veterans that are, wondering why they went over there. We're still over there 20 years later and everything. So I was wondering, is there a danger that could happen in Russia as well, that there could be folks lingering in that area, say in, this is 2023, 2040, 2043, or 2050, because that is one of the other articles that I saw, was the fact that we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of that lovely Shock and Awe campaign and everything. And a lot of folks, when it happened, thought that we would be in and out, but it's 20 years later and there's still U.S. troops in Iraq.
Well, you're right. The wars are very easily could be started and very difficult to finish, to end the war. And you see, it's very seldom happening what's happened in 1945, when one side was decidedly defeated, destroyed, and was unconditional capitulation and so on. It's very seldom. It's happened in 1945, but it's very few far in between when that scenario is really happening. Most of the time, it's some negotiations and some agreements and some here. But you see, here in Ukraine, after what Russian forces are doing, maiming, killing innocent civilians, just a day or day before yesterday, what's happening is that they captured a family and they put and tied up the husband, and several men raped his wife right in front of him, and then they raped his 4 years daughter. And when cases like this happening, it's very, very difficult to talk about any peace negotiations or peace talks or so on. It's incredible.
Yeah, that makes sense and everything. I don't know if you got any thoughts about that, Lee, but the other thing I was going to bring up and everything, and you kind of alluded to it when you asked about China, but apparently China is making a lot of moves, some by the country itself and the leadership of the country, some by other countries that are involved with them. Because I think I mentioned yesterday about the China brokered Saudi-Iran deal, which of course is having all kinds of repercussions for the Middle East and the United States. And then I just learned today that a ally of Taiwan is actually saying that they want to go more under the direction of China. So that is the Latin American country of Honduras. They are seeking a diplomatic switch to China. So they are seeking China relations and pressuring Taiwan ahead of that U.S. trip. And for a minute there, they had definitely been a ally of Taiwan. So, and I know that's a very poor country, because I had the pleasure of interviewing a woman on one of our other shows, that being the Shirley Liu show, who is originally from Honduras. So she shared a little bit of insight into that country, and also about financial literacy, because that is what she is all about. But definitely, what are your thoughts around some of these moves by some of our smaller nations that are looking to get more deeply ingrained with China? And like I said, I use Honduras as an example, and I also use that Saudi-Iran deal as another example. But what are you gentlemen's thoughts about what China is doing in that space?
From the Chinese standpoint or from the country's standpoint? From the country's standpoint, I think it's extremely misguided. People are taking short-term profits because they're having economic problems, not looking long-term what's going to happen to the citizenry and to the country.
Yeah. China has always used their economic prowess to bribe, cajole, or otherwise convince politicians from other countries, and in our own country too, to play along with their schemes. Right, our own politicians are not immune to this influence. On the Republican side, the senior senator is influenced that way. The president of the United States is obviously, and his family has taken money from
most
China.
congressmen, Dan, are like that. So looking at what's in it for them, not what's in it for the citizens.
Well, you're right. That's the problem, and China knows how to play it. They have plenty of money because we give them plenty of money every year because of the balance of trade and that kind of thing. So, China is our biggest nemesis. Russia is a weakened power now, as Sasha knows, and but they're corrupt. I mean, these people that are going around raping and injuring people are basically criminals that have been released from prisons and other things. They're the lowest life forms on the face of the earth. What they're doing are committing war crimes and atrocities, and that should be stopped immediately. It's horrible what they're doing. Sasha really likes to demonize Republicans in the United States because he wants them to everybody to think that they support the Russians. They don't. What they may not want to do is continue to support ongoing billions and billions of dollars in spending. But I'm not going to demonize the Republicans. Being an independent like I am, Sasha. And I know you have an extreme dislike of Republicans and that kind of thing. Of course, you don't like your own prime minister because he's a weenie. We know that, right?
He's a middle schoolboy compared to Trump.
Yeah, Trump should should retire from politics and get out of it. I don't think it's fair to demonize DeSantis at all. And because I don't think that he's done anything to deserve demonizing. No, I don't think anybody in the United States really wants to get drawn into this war. We are providing economic support, but I don't think we want to get drawn in with troops or anything else. It would generate World War II, or World War III. We may be in it already, since the Chinese and the Russians are deploying space-based weapons. We may already be there. That's all being pre-positioned in anticipation of a strike. We know that, and so. But the problem is, it's going to be mutually assured destruction again. So nuclear war is not survivable, despite what Russia and China thinks, and it's going to be an interesting day.
But then, look, China with 1.5 billion population, they probably think that in case of the nuclear war, they may lose a third, maybe even half of their population, 2/3, if you will. But there still leaves millions and hundreds of millions of people alive. And at the same time, US
Sasha, the problem is, in an all-out nuclear war, it would create nuclear winter. It would destroy life on the earth as we know it. It's the one thing they worried about back in 1945 when the first nuclear explosion took place. They worried about a chain reaction and destroying the world. And with the number of nuclear weapons that both sides have, it's conceivable that there won't be any place left safe on the earth to occupy because of the fallout and the debris in the atmosphere and the weather changes, and certainly that kind of activity would also probably produce all kinds of earthquakes and other seismic activity. I mean, the devastation would be final. That's the problem with.
I agree with everything what you just said. I agree with everything 100%. There are some lunatics who believe that the attack will be limited, maybe 150 million people will be killed, and that's it. I believe in everything what you just said. The problem is with if the threat of the nuclear war is such great that U.S. should avoid it at all cost, then Russians will be emboldened. I'm not sure about China. They're more kind of realistic people. They want to have a great trade and so on, and sell their goods around the world and so on. Now, the Russia, see, the Russia historically, people in Russia, they're not materialistic. Not that's not the right word.
They're mentally stable.
That's it. Okay, I can take that. And also, they are very mystically oriented. They don't have a real achievable goals in their scenarios. They're always dreaming about some kind of a event that will change everything, and finally Russia will be recognized as a supreme power and supreme country, where they will defend the rights of the so-called normal heterosexual people, and they will rule and attract the populations and people from all over the world. Now, the problem is that if the threat of the nuclear exchange is so great, so U.S. should be very careful, for example, not to supply arms to Ukraine, not to supply arms to Taiwan, for example, or some other countries, and they should actually take a more peaceful approach to Russia or so on. So it will not stop Russia right there. Okay, we agree to this, we agree to that. Let's call it a peace.
Russia. No, I think the U.S. is doing what it has to do right now with respect to Ukraine. We've said a number of times, well, they have to decide to get in or get out. The reality is they're doing, I think, what's in their best interest right now, and that is keeping a stalemate, making Russia weaker. Because Russia's throwing troops at Ukraine and losing, it's probably 5-1, at least or more. And it's going to get worse. I mean, they're going to run out of ability to support this war within too long. They just don't have the base to do it. And especially if the world continues to stand behind Ukraine, that stalemate will peter out into some sort of negotiated settlement.
Dan, is the world standing behind Ukraine, or are they helping Russia by just still trading with Russia?
Well, that's what.
Well, there are elements that are, but they're and some are major, like India are big populations, that kind of thing. There's a lot of backdoor dealing right now. The Chinese are. Go ahead.
Yeah, speaking of that backdoor dealing, because it ties into what y'all are both talking about, apparently as of yesterday, there are talks that are continuing to extend a deal to allow grain shipments, and we know grain is very important to the world and everything from Ukraine's Black Sea ports, and the United Nations and Turkey reported on that yesterday on Tuesday after Kyiv rejected a Russian push for a reduced 60-day renewal. So they're actually asking for a renewal, and they signed it back in July 22nd, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, where definitely millions of tons of grain and other food products have been exported from Ukrainian ports, and that helped lower the global food prices from record highs. But if this doesn't go through and it's kind of like halted or whatever, then we might have a food price crisis around the world, I would think, and everything. But
we already do.
There is a possibility that this what's happened yesterday to the US drone is connected to grain supply, because the US has army of drones which are overseeing everything what's happening in the Black Sea, and probably Russians wanted to disable U.S. ability to see what's happening there, and that's why they deliberately not injured but disabled this U.S. drone. In my opinion, there must be a reason for that.
Well, the guys that we had here yesterday, by the way, will be quite happy about something else that I just learned today as well, because over in Ghana, it was reported that U.S. commanders are leading an annual counterterrorism exercise in West Africa, and they've urged coastal countries to depend on each other to contain what the gentlemen were talking about yesterday, which is a spreading Islamist insurgency rather than non-Western powers after Mali last year hired Russian mercenaries. So relationships between Russia and the U.S., of course, have become more hostile over the last year and so because of the invasion of Ukraine. But it does look like there is some at least acknowledgement that it is going on with Islamist group, as like the gentleman said from Nigeria yesterday, and definitely Mali is one of those countries. But it does look like the West is paying attention to what is going on there, and they do know that there are, as you mentioned, Sasha, Russian mercenaries that are part of the disruption of what is going on in that area as well. So definitely they're saying that it could be, security experts say it could be get worse after thousands of French troops were forced out of Mali and Burkina Faso by military juntas this past year and everything, or this year.
Well, that's the French, right? They're wusses anyway, right?
That's what we know that there are other people that are on this network that are not big fans of the French. We know that definitely Chris says, Chris Greco has said that a few times, but there are other things that are going on in the African nation, because apparently the United States and Ethiopia are looking at a long-term partnership, which I don't know how the folks from Eritrea are going to feel about that, since they have been involved in a long-time war for a while as well. But definitely it does look like America is.
Oh, they'll just go get Chinese help.
That's what they'll do, is go get Chinese help. And that is probably what a lot of countries are going to do.
Yeah, but you see, as China using predominantly soft power in Africa, but Russia is not doing that at all. They're using brute force. Some
they are the bear.
This private armies like Prigozhin's, this what it calls Wagner Group or so on. And what's the problem? It's not that Wagner Group is attacking some government African army and defeated it or not defeated it or so on.
They're thugs.
They're corrupting all societies around.
Yeah, that's what they do.
And
it's kind of like what our CIA does. Yeah, I know.
Exactly, and this is a big obstacle of what we discussed yesterday. So, United States would become a little bit more active in Africa or so on. You can't even imagine what you are up against together with China and Russia when one is doing one thing, another one is doing, and they're all acting in accord. So the China is very pragmatic country. They believe that one-on-one with the US, they have no chance. But with Russia, and openly declaring that from now, China and Russia for many, many years are trying to distract Western financial system. They are trying to distract US dollar and like predominant reserve currency. So this is ongoing on with those space satellites, with African forces, war in Ukraine or so on. Then Russia is very substantial threat to United States interests.
I agree. Yeah.
But it's not just Africa that's in trouble, because that's what I was getting ready to get to, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about it, because there are two former European powers that are dealing with their own issues and everything, while also paying attention to the war in Ukraine and Russia, because we do know that the UK government, the United Kingdom, is announced their spending and tax plans as their strike actions, because they're definitely having issues around labor, and their strike actions are looking at disrupting both schools and travel and all in that space. And then, of course, we know about what's going on in Paris, and y'all were just talking about some people that are not the biggest fans of France and Paris, or they're probably even less of a fans if there's this long-time garbage strike going on. And there's a lot of people that are alarmed at the amount of garbage that is piling up over there in Paris. And there are a lot of folks that are saying that as their sanitation workers continue their strike, that the city of romance is being turned into the city of trash. And definitely there are folks that are trying to demand them to come back, and there are folks that are worried about a rat invasion in that area.
They've got a number of rats there already. It's called Macron and his leadership, rats. But I mean, it's just think of Pierre Lepew and everything will be fine.
Just take a few and everything will be fine. Because that's one of their great heroes and all in that space. So we're just going to go in that direction. We're just going to go.
We don't care we don't care if they want to mess up their country. They're perfectly. They got the perfect right to do that. I mean, they're just shooting themselves in the foot. Doesn't make any sense.
Well, Dan, speaking of shooting themselves in the foot, and I think Lee will enjoy this one because we talk about our politicians and we talk about other politicians in the West, but there is a person that, because we've talked about celebrities that have become politicians. Well, it doesn't just happen in the United States; it happens in other parts of the world as well. And there was a YouTube star that became a lawmaker last year, a Japanese YouTube star, Gase, and he lost his seat in his parliament because apparently he wasn't going to work. So, like I said, he was a YouTube star, got elected, and then they decided to let go of him because he's not going to work. So, do we need to do the same thing with our United States senators? If they don't go to work, we just go ahead and
fire them? I think so. If they don't want to show up for votes and stuff, we should fire their butts. They don't want to work.
Dan, who should fire them though? And is there a requirement to show up? And who isn't it the elections? Elections decide who goes into office. As far as I know, a president, once elected, could play golf all day long and sleep till 12. Am I wrong? We've had presidents who've done that.
Well, yeah, Biden slept till 12. It's okay.
I mean, there's no requirement he does anything, is there?
Well, there should be, though.
There should be, because apparently, like I said, I was going to say this Japanese YouTuber, they expelled him from parliament, so
they fired him. So I mean,
we have a different style of government, though, Dan and Mark.
We should have a process to impeach our bums, right? Get them out. If they're not doing their job, they should be impeached. They should go. That's just the way it should work. There should be a mechanism that we could kick our bums out, not have to wait for an election cycle.
But we had that. It's been very politicized when Trump was president.
Well, speaking of politicized, and we just talked about the money that was going to Ukraine, but one of the things that is going to be talked about, I'm sure,
was weaponized when Trump was
defense budget and everything, whether it was under Trump, whether it was
a better word, okay,
and everything. But the current defense budget apparently is looking at a watershed $1 trillion defense budget, and the Pentagon's $842 billion budget boost, and is getting ready to come along as well. And they're saying it's going to boost procurement, research and development, and the personnel is going to be shrinking. Do we need to be spending this kind of money on our defense, or is this like too much on our local defense? Because the budget is definitely growing, but they're saying the defense stock may not necessarily be growing. So,
Mark, is the money we're spending on Ukraine coming out of our defense budget?
I would imagine so, but Sasha may have a better idea. But I would think that
yes.
If that's the case, then there's no limit. The budget's a joke then, because there's no limit to what we're giving Ukraine. It's an open check. Am I wrong? A blank check.
But it sounds like to me,
whether it's good or bad, I'm just saying the reality is that's what it is. Maybe for the right reasons, but Sasha, you're muted.
Sasha,
you're muted.
You're muted, Sasha. I don't know why.
Yeah, Sasha, you're muted. You got to unmute yourself, Sasha. I did not mute you.
Sorry, Lee. I wanted to mention that there is ongoing audit provided by both Republican and Democrats about the funds delivered to Ukraine, same as weapons. And so far, report is that they have not found any improprieties. I'm not saying that.
I'm not disagreeing with that. Are they voting on?
Are you aware of any improprieties? Can you tell me the date?
No, I'm not talking about improprieties. I'm just saying, is there a blank check or not?
There was never such thing as a blank check. It's something which was invented by Republicans who are against helping Ukraine.
So all Ukrainian funding then is voted on by Congress, you're saying?
Every time when the funding for Ukraine is voted by Congress, there is always a stipulation which arms would be purchased with that. Most of the arms are being purchased from U.S. manufacturers, and they benefit from this policy, and it will be going in place for the next 5 years, mind you, because they, at the very beginning, when they were asked about supply, they said we have to essentially almost like open new factories. And we are not going to open factory for 1 month or 2 months. We need 5 years. The
lead time is a lot. I agree with you. Okay.
Rapid supply. So that was agreed. So they're now working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 3 shifts to provide, and certain, I know for sure that certain weapons they are making specifically for Ukraine, specifically for this war. So this is why I do believe that it's going to be a long war. Nothing will happen fast. See, for Russians, for America, okay, we can help Ukraine, we may not help Ukraine, maybe we'll do this or maybe we'll do that. For Russia, and specifically for Ukraine, is a existential war. For Ukraine, it's whether they will exist as a people, as a nation. And for Russia, it's mostly actually not for Russia, but for Putin. It's whether he will stay in power and continue to bleed his own people, or he will be replaced one way or another. That's really what the situation there. Now, the blank check, again, I never heard such a concept except from Republican-minded Fox News and some other stations.
Hey, Sasha, I have a quick question just based on climate, because I don't always know climate of different countries, but I'm going to actually mention another country that went in a long war. They actually had a 12-year war and everything, and then they just recently had a earthquake, which is the last thing that folks said that they needed, and that was Syria, because Syria was in the middle of a 12-year war, and then the forces of nature decided to deal them another blow with this lovely earthquake. So is there any possibility of torrential weather playing a role in what is both currently going on or after the war as well? Because I don't know enough about Ukraine and its climate to know whether they face the dangers of tornadoes or earthquakes or a number of other things. So that's what happened in Syria. I was wondering if something similar could happen in Ukraine, and if you have any idea, since you used to live in that country, as to whether climate could play a role even in the rebuilding structure the way it is done in Syria.
Okay, in Ukraine, I'm not aware that there are any tornadoes or any such things that we have to worry about. I think the biggest benefactor of global warming is definitely Canada, because this winter was very mild. Today is a sunny day, +5 or something, maybe even more. So it's quite unusual, because normally you would have 0, maybe sub-zero temperature, most likely. So if there is a global warming, no, Canada is doing okay.
And there's a little small country, speaking of global things going on, there's a little small country that's also complaining about what's going on in Russia, and they're even complaining about the Wagner Group, and that is the country of Italy. That little country that's looks like a boot and everything, because apparently Italy is blaming Russia for its refugee surge and its offshore deaths that they are suffering, and they are definitely blaming Russia's Wagner Group for the surge in migration. So are we going to see a lot of people continue to move over to Italy and all in that space? Because apparently that is where a lot of folks are migrating to, and Italy was already having its own issues globally, and now they've got to deal with their own surge of migrants as well. So is this something that the world needs to be concerned about, a whole host of Russians invading Italy and coming into that small country?
Thanks to Russia, all it wants is to destabilize a Western society any way they could, either through threatening to stop energy supply. It failed. Now they organized, I think a year ago, 2 years ago, when there were refugees from Syria, Iraq, a few other countries, they were giving actually airfare tickets to fly to Minsk, Belarus. So from there, they would cross border to Poland, and Poland put their armed forces and say that anyone who could cross the border will be killed instantly right there. So that stopped this plan as to invade Europe from Poland, because Poland is a member of the European Union, and so if once you're in Poland, you can probably continue to some other countries of European Union. So that was stopped. And now there are a lot of refugees directly from Russian refugees. Well, there are so many of them, and they're going different routes. Some of them are crossing the border on their foot to Mongolia. Some of them are going to Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia,
Sasha?
wherever they get to. Yes.
Are these deserters? People who are leaving Russia so they don't get conscripted in the Russian army? So they're really leaving because their lives are in jeopardy?
Some of them, yes. There were a lot of people who left Russia before the war. So there was no concept of mobilization or anything like this. They were just trying to hide from Putin and his regime. But now with the mobilization in place, that's maybe evidently much more so. So people are crossing. So now Russians are smart enough. So at least on the borders with countries of former Soviet Union, such as Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia, others, they're putting their own border guards to capture the people who want to escape from mobilization. So they're capturing them right at the border and turning them directly to the front lines. Right.
Hey, Sasha, just really quickly, why does, and I know we've talked about it before, but I don't know all the reasoning, but definitely there are still efforts to get two countries into NATO, namely Finland and Sweden, and it does look like Turkey is going to plans to ratify that bid for Finland, at least, and everything in that space. At least that's what Erdogan is hinting at. But Hungary is definitely saying that it's going to delay the votes on membership for those two countries. What is Hungary waiting for, and why do they want to delay these votes and everything?
Well, you know that Mr. Orban, ruler of Hungary, he's a very close supporter of Kremlin, very close ally of Putin. And of course, he'll do anything possible and impossible to do whatever he can against interests of the West, European Union, NATO. And that was a different situation when Hungary was accepted to European Union and NATO in the late 90s. It was a very different political landscape there. So right now, unfortunately, that's the way it is. And I don't know what's going to be. Of course, what I could see is that Hungary will be cut from any European financial help, financial institution, and probably US as well. And whether it will be enough to change their minds remains to be seen.
That makes sense. Well, we're getting ready to wind down, but I was going to bring up some of the world's favorite subject and everything, because we do like to keep track of the world's favorite subject. And there is no doubt that things that have to do with sex can be some of the world's favorite subjects. And apparently sex has come into the news again twice today, one on the abortion side, but not the abortion side from the United States, and one on somebody that apparently stealthed his partner. And I'll explain what that is and then hear y'all's gentlemen's thoughts about that after these two stories. But Justyna Wojciechowski was convicted of illegally providing abortion pills in Poland. So she definitely was convicted of doing that. And she is an activist from that country. And she is facing 3 years of jail term for helping in that abortion. And then the last story that I'll get to, which is about the stealth partner, is apparently they're in that lovely area of Netherlands. And we do know they have some very liberal rules about everything from drugs to prostitution to a number of other things. But a man was convicted of stealthing his partner. And apparently that is where you have protection. And I'll just leave it at that and everything. Well, it's a word that can be said. You use the condom and you remove it without the consent during sex. So that is what stealthing is. And this is Netherlands having its first sex stealthing conviction. If they ever try to get that done in the United States, there might be a whole lot of folks that get busted and arrested, because I've heard of a number of folks that have tried to do that here in the United States. But definitely it would be interesting what happens. But apparently Netherlands is ahead of the curve, and they have actually convicted somebody of this horrible crime and all in that space. So Lee, you're over there in New York. I know that there are probably some people in New York that could be accused of doing that crime as well.
You really want to hear what I got to say about this? It baffles my mind how any unmarried person could have sex with somebody else. I don't get it. You're setting yourself up for rape, for disease, for so many troubles down the road. What are people thinking? Forget about the morals of it. They have the morning after the regret. He said, she said. Was it rape? Wasn't rape? Did you get a disease, STD? Did you not? What have you? What do you stand to gain? 5 minutes of pleasure? Is it worth it?
Well, I mean, you got some people that will say that if they are going to be permanently single or in that single space, but they still want to
Right?
have relationships that they may not want
You
to
can have
be
a
in.
relationship while having sex. I think that does exist, platonic relationships. Why does sex have to be so ingrained in people, in one night stands or whatever you want to call it,
I guess the question
or
I'm
even long
asking
term
you, I guess the
relationships?
question I'm asking you, and this is a question that many a single person would ask, is if you don't want to be in the institution of marriage, but you still want to have the pleasures of relationships, then what is the other alternative? It sounds to me like you're saying that the only alternative is marriage, but there are a number of folks around the world of various ages that are enjoying their single life, and sometimes they even enjoy long-time relationships without ever marrying their partner and everything, but they have
You could do that. I don't have a problem with that. But why does sex have to be a part of it? That's my question. Is it? Can you explain that to me?
I
You
mean,
can
what
be
does sex
great
have to be?
friends, male, male, female, 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 male, whatever.
Yeah, you can have platonic friends, but there are some people that want to have a relationship, but they don't necessarily want to marry that person that they have a relationship with. Now, they keep courting them, they keep having that courtship, then it may lead to marriage. And in some cases, the one or two of the partners are ready for that next step. I mean, the three of you, as I understand, are married, but I've been in that single space, and I know quite a few folks in the single space that
Mark,
enjoy.
this may shock you, but even though we're married, at one time we were not.
That is true. I do know that.
Everybody
That is true.
starts out the same.
Everybody starts out the same, but I'm just saying that
Some
there
of us
are times.
has had that honor many times.
Say what?
Some of us have been married many times.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's part of the culture of certain religions and everything that you are allowed to be married multiple times, and sometimes it's not even the cultures, because I do know people.
Well, no, I mean serially, not concurrently.
Not consecutively, not the monogamy
Yeah.
aspect.
Not at the same time.
Not
It's
at
a
the same time.
monogamy aspect of it. Yes.
Yeah.
You have to, monogamy.
The monogamy aspect, but that is
You
something.
know, they call it the law of chastity.
The law of chastity, and
Yeah,
Steve.
the
finally
one
made it.
God gave, the one God gave. You know that
Good morning, Steve. Look what the wind blew in.
likes to
Yeah, the wind
violate,
blew in,
you know.
Steve, right at
I
the
had
end for
work
his
today.
historical closeout.
Steve, I'm sorry,
no,
you're late for
definitely, I
class.
think
Do you have a note?
I'm sorry, I was out working today.
Okay.
No, you were
I
doing
want
your
to
work.
do something
Hey,
up at the first
Steve,
of the
just really
show.
quickly, since they brought up the topic, and like I said, 60 years old and still been in that single space all of my life, and definitely have had some relationships that were long term and some that were not. But what is we're talking about stealthing, because there was a guy in Netherlands that got convicted of stealthing, which basically means taking off the condom during a relationship, and they were saying Lee was that he doesn't understand the nature of sex within relationships that are outside of marriage. And I'm probably not phrasing it correctly, but what
For
advice?
practical reasons. No, forget about the morals of it, Steve. For practical reasons, not to get STDs, and also so that you are not brought up on rape charges, because he said, she said, people regret the next morning.
Oh yeah, I mean. That's
So I guess the question I was
That's
asking you,
the
Steve, is what
problem.
advice do you give to your young kids? Because you have teenagers and actually some that are
Be virtuous,
been
follow the
near
law of
20 and
chastity.
everything. So what advice do
Follow
you give to
God's
your
law.
folks as they're going to explore
What's
that
wrong
part
with
of
that?
life?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of faith in both my children. They have really good heads on their shoulders, and we've told them that whatever decisions they make, they'll have to live with the consequences. But I think my thing is, I would just get into relationships with people that you trust, that you respect,
Right.
and just be careful. In this day and age, you got to be very careful. I don't actually meet with women alone unless I'm with groups of three, just because I don't want to, if you say something inappropriate, they
Well, that
say,
sounds
he said,
interesting.
she said, you got to be very careful. I used to hug women, but I don't anymore. I let them hug me. Just small little things, because you're just so
Do you
scared of
smell their hair? That's what I want to know.
No, I can't do anything.
Doesn't matter the smell test,
Hey,
Dan.
hey, Steve, speaking of
Yeah.
folks that are in trouble, and I know we're winding down, so I'll have you give your opening / closing comments and everything, but there is a politician, we've alluded to him before, that is in some deep hot water because apparently he can be implicated in a Saudi jewelry case. But yes, Brazil's Bolsonaro is possibly going to be implicated in a jewelry case that involves the Saudis and all of that stuff. So don't know what's going on with there. Maybe he was involved in the stealing of Saudi jewelry or something along those
I don't
lines.
care.
But you don't
Yeah.
care?
I don't care.
He's a world leader. Now you don't care about
No,
a world
no,
leader
he's not
giving
anymore.
a lot more.
He got defeated.
Hey, so
don't
I
care.
didn't really have any closeout prepared because I didn't really look at what was going on in the world today. I got out of a city meeting yesterday at 11. But my final closeout is about something I think that we need to talk about in this show is artificial intelligence. And I've been very intrigued with this whole notion that these technology companies are launching these AI platforms like Bing or ChatGPT, and there's no accuracy in any of the statements that are made. You could put in something that, you know, what if we put in ChatGPT? You know, Steve Rao is a proud leader of the Republican Party and is what Republicans need. And then it would just come out there and say, write it like a newsworthy article, and then people would believe it, you know. But
Steve, that's not just the ChatGPT.
You should be a proud
That's not just the
leader in the
ChatGPT.
Republican
Isn't that what
Party.
we got?
Well, damn, we got to be careful using the word proud with Steve because he might be brought up in charge of being a proud boy.
no,
Oh
but the
yeah,
problem
well,
is,
or it can be considered something else. You know,
but the problem is there needs to be a regulatory agency like the Federal Aviation Administration, like the
it's so
FDA,
different now.
that's managing these technology companies. And we'll talk about that next week. But AI, the often acronym is the new, you know, is the new thing. It's the hot thing. But with it comes ethical responsibilities and limits and challenges to this platform. And so here we
Steve?
are, you know, so.
Technically, it's AI, but technically, it's not because it's programmed by humans.
Yes,
So humans could put
Yeah.
biases in there.
Mhm.
that's
Right.
right.
That's the
And so
danger of
I'm
it.
going to go out and write an article about you being a Republican and a great leader and
Or Shaquille being a
on
liberal.
ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Or Shaquille being a liberal, or
Get it put out on
Sasha support-
API
or,
and
you
all
know,
that.
Sasha Starr supports Russia. Sasha Starr supports Trump, and then the GPT. would
Yeah,
come
no,
in and say,
that's a good one.
No, did you just hear the latest news? I just got it in from the world and everything, and we'll say on this note because Sasha will get a big laugh out of this and everything. But Sasha Starr is really Sally Starr. So Sasha Starr is really a woman. He's been masqueraded as a guy all this time, but he's really a woman. And all that's me. So that is actually Sally Starr.
Well, you know, Sasha, it's a good idea because you'd be a butt ugly woman.
Well, folks, that's it. We'll see you tomorrow morning. I've got Alan Thomas, the SBA director, coming in tomorrow for the Southeast director of the SBA to talk about small business with Congresswoman Ross, Valerie Fouché, Secretary of State Alon Marshall. It should be a great event. We'll be talking about that tomorrow of what led us to this great moment in North Carolina to bring all these great leaders in. From our family to yours, we wish you all the best, and we'll see you tomorrow. And thank you, guests. Thank you, team, for running the show today.
Thank you.
No problem at all.
Take care, guys. God bless.
Take it easy.